Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Make sure you forget me here. I'm going to kill the light effect. Remember that Bernini had, being a Baroque artist in Italy, had been very much influenced by the ideas that came out of the Counter-Reformation, particularly at the Council of Trent, that talked about the ways in which religious art should try to engage with its audience. There were rules about the style of art related to, particularly to religious art, that meant that it had to be clear, it had to be realistic, right? And it had to inspire piety. It had to sort of engage with you as a viewer. And so Bernini is very, very good at that, as was Caravaggio, but in sculpture. So he makes this David much more dramatic, which is a hallmark of a lot of Baroque art, is a high-pitched sense of drama. We spent a lot of time comparing him to Michelangelo's David, which is very laid back by comparison. Has that contrapposto pose that is perpetual relaxation, right? Poised and ready to act, but not actually doing anything. Whereas Bernini's David is right in the middle of it all, right? He's about to swing that sling, and it's clenched and taut, right, and ready to spring forward. The work on the right was done for the nephew of the Pope, a collector named Borghese, Scipione Borghese. It's still in the Borghese Palace in Rome today. And Scipione Borghese was the nephew of the Pope, Pope Urban VIII. And he showed Urban VIII this sculpture he had gotten from Bernini, and Urban VIII immediately hired Bernini to be his court artist, to work on a number of projects for the papacy. And this continued not only through Urban VIII, but through two other popes after that. For the next 20, 30 years, Bernini is working for the papacy. Not exclusively, but primarily. Right? So the David really set him on his career. Right? And we looked at the arms of St. Peter's Square, which were designed by Bernini. We looked at the Four Rivers Fountain by Bernini. These were both commissioned by a later pope, Pope Innocent X. Right? Obviously, St. Peter's, I don't have to explain to you why that's important to the Pope. Right? That's the seat of the papacy. But the Four Rivers Fountain in the square that faced Pope Innocent's family palace. And the Four Rivers meant as a metaphor for the extent of papal power. Each of the rivers associated with a continent, those continents under the control of the papacy. Right? Now we have one more work by Bernini, which I finally got a chance to see last year for the first time. I've been teaching this for 30 years, and I finally got there. Fantastic work by Bernini. Now, while we think of Bernini primarily as a sculptor, we've seen he's also an architect. And in many ways, we can think of him kind of like a set designer. In fact, we know that he actually designed sets for theater as well. But in this case, this is a chapel, a family chapel, the Cornaro Chapel. You can look that up in your text. But Bernini not only sculpted the over life-size figures that are in the niche, but he also designed and helped to carve the architectural setting. Those colored marble columns, the split pediment up above, all of the stucco figures around the edges here, up above, the painting, right? More stucco figures, the stained glass. This is all Bernini's design. It's a multimedia extravaganza, right? Where he's really pulled out all the stops. And it really does seem almost like a piece of theater. Here's a close-up of the figures. He's working not only with marble for the main sculpture, but with almost every other kind of medium out there. Like I mentioned, fresco, so he's working with plaster, but he's also working with wood, with gold, with glass. Inside that niche, there's a natural window. So the light that comes down those wooden rods that are covered with gold leaf is actually natural light, seems to sort of glow from heaven, depending on the light outside. The picture on the left, clouds had moved through, so you can't quite see that effect of the light streaming down those golden rays on this miraculous vision that St. Teresa had of an angel that appeared to her, right, and sort of drove her into wild spiritual ecstasy, which we'll talk about in just a second. But all of this now designed by Bernini, and incredibly dramatic, incredibly theatrical. This is all totally counter-Reformation, Council of Trent ideas. Bernini, by the way, also practiced a particular form of prayer that was critical to the counter-Reformation. We'll talk about it again later today. But it was called the spiritual exercises. Have you ever heard of those before, like in a theology class like that? Spiritual exercises? Is that a yes? Will you know? Spiritual exercises. These were devised in the late 16th century. And they were devised by a guy named Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. The Jesuits within the Catholic Church. Like we have Saint Ignatius Loyola. And if you think about the kind of Reformation trying to appeal to your personal sense of piety, keep you engaged with the work, right? St. Ignatius Loyola's spiritual exercises is very similar to that, in that what it was a program of, I don't know, it's like a self-help program, for lack of a better word. I don't want to sound disrespectful. But basically, it said that as you practice your prayers, as you're reading your Bible, as you're imagining, thinking about, say you were reading about Christ carrying the cross on the way to Calvary crucified, that what you should do is try to really physically imagine it in front of you. And imagine not only what it looked like, but use all of your senses. To think about, like, what does it feel like? What would it feel like to have a heavy cross on your shoulders? What would it feel like to be walking barefoot along the rocky path? What would the dust taste like if it got in your mouth? The sweat dripping down your brow. Imagine the saltiness of that. Right? Imagine the sounds you hear as the jeering crowds around you, mocking you as you walk. Right? Use all of your senses, not just your sense of sight. And thus, try to imagine yourself to be truly there. Right? And this would take weeks, right, to do this. This is sort of like I said, one time we can crowd out this and got it. And a lot of people began to practice it. In case of Loyola was also a 16th century writer. Right? And Bernini practiced the spiritual exercise. We know this, right? He was very, very deeply attached. And would try to use all of his senses to immerse himself in the subject that he might be using as part of his prayer. And so if you think about sound, you think about touch, you think about taste, you think about smell. And often you would also think about sight. To engage with the reading that much more thoroughly. And actually go back to your taking into the class. Look back to it. Reading a detective novel, and somebody told them to get a sheet. What that really sounds really get into it, right? Imagine how much more impact would have on you. Well, that's what Bernini did, and I think that the outcome of the spiritual exercises really goes through his work, because it really does kind of reach out and engage you in more than just a passive visual sense. It really seems like you're there, that you're part of something that's happening around you, which is exactly the outcome of the spiritual exercises, was to believe, to think, to envision yourself as truly there. Now, it's also, as I said, highly dramatic. All the different colored stone. You see, for example, that the marble is not just the color of marble of the statues themselves, but we have green marble around the sides, we have black marble columns, we have reddish marble with dark red marble inlays, all of these different stones that add to this sort of sumptuousness that's almost overwhelming. And everything has a sort of a operatic or dramatic sense to it, right? And I think Bernini is very much aware of this, and you'll notice, I know these are tied together in this kind of odd outside set, but he's also carved members of the family who paid for it as if they're sitting in theater seats watching this. So it almost looks like we're looking into, a theater itself, right? And the background is carved in perspective to make it look like it's three-dimensional when it really isn't that much. Right? There's a lot of this fooling of your eye that we see throughout this, right? So those figures on the side, not only are they members of the family who paid for it, but they help to enhance this theatrical sense that Bernini is working with. Now, our saint is also from the same time period. She's a 16th century saint, so she's a Counter-Reformation saint, right? Saint Teresa of Avila. And you can see she hadn't been dead all that long, less than 100 years, when Bernini paints this, or sculpts this image. And the primary element of her biography that people remember is this moment when, while in the midst of one of these Counter-Reformation full engagement prayers, right? Like what Ignatius Loyola suggested, where you get into it, right? Like, with all of your senses, you immerse yourself in what you're reading. In the middle of this, she wrote that she was visited by an angel. And the angel made her feel in her heart the pain that Christ felt. And he did this by piercing her chest with an arrow. So that's the moment we see here. The angel is lifting up her robe and gently, right? Look how he's holding his son. He's not like Abraham with Isaac, in the Brunelleschi sculptures. He's not going at her, but he's like, you can touch her with that arrow, right? But she said it pierced him again and again. And she said it was pain, but it was pain that was so sweet that she wished it would never stop. Right? And so he covers her, her ecstasy. It's not only she's fainting dead away, right? But the ecstasy kind of comes out in that amazing fabric. This is carved marble. And look at that fabric. It's fantastic, isn't it? I mean, look at those folds. And it totally covers her body with the exception of her hand. And you can see her toes sort of sticking out at the bottom. They're hard to see here. It's behind the cross, right? But her toes sticking out the bottom. And the angel, has this sort of privileged view beneath all of those robes. I've never been able to see somebody with a mirror back there to see if you can see her underneath her robes or not. I bet Bernini, you can. Right? But I think that in many ways, even though Bernini loves these over-the-top draperies, right? Again, carved from a single piece of stone, right? Over-the-top draperies that we see, those hers are different than the angels, right? Angels are tighter and crisper, hers are these big broad folds. He loves that sort of drapery on the one hand, but on the other hand, I think he sees it as a symbol of her ecstasy, right? It's so overblown, which is typical of the Baroque period. Nice detail here as well. It's a little grainy because it was dark, but there's the angel with that gentle hold on the gilded arrow. You'll notice the arrow's made out of metal, so it's again a multimedia work. But has a look on his face that is not at all angry or anything like that. That's not the point. He's caressing her. That's the word she uses, that the angel caressed my soul. Right? And Bernini understands that. And she faints dead away. Like I said, there's this sort of tease. You see her skin come out from underneath that robe, just here and there, her foot, her hand, her face. And the angel is now looking underneath her robe and trying to gently, says, who could find her underneath all that if he didn't lift it up, And Bernini is, I think, very good at understanding sort of, not only is her ecstasy, but how to get other people to experience this, because it's a kind of engagement that most of us are never going to have, right? A full metaphysical, supernatural experience where you're visited by an angel. But, there is a kind of ecstasy that many of us do eventually experience, and he kind of brings that in, But the swoon that she has is something that I think we can very much relate to. We can read in that the very human emotion
of someone who is deep in the thralls of rapture almost, right? Just really carried away by what's taking place. So what we saw when we looked at Italian Baroque art is that the precepts of the Counter-Reformation, and in particular the precepts of the Council of Trent, are very, very strong for how Baroque art ends up looking in Italy, whether we're talking about paintings like Caravaggio's or sculptures like Bernini's. They're both aiming at the same thing, which is using drama, high drama, to engage you as a viewer, because the work of art's primary purpose is to inspire you, right? And it does that through drama, through emotions, but also cleaning up the sort of style that we had under Mannerism, making it more legible, more clear and understandable. Now we're going to move to two other countries tonight and look at works of art made in Spain, and then we'll move from there to another Catholic country, Flanders. So here we see two works of art from Spain, and we already saw the one on the right very briefly. But Spain, being Catholic, is also very much interested in trying to get religious art to match up with the Counter-Reformation standards for clarity, right, for simplicity, right, for accuracy, for drama, emotionalism. And so many Spanish artists turn to Caravaggio for influence because he got it so right. He brings the characters close up to the picture, close up to you, the viewer, to what we call the picture plane. Right? He limits our view of things so that really all we see is the saint against the darkened background, highlighted for an increased sense of drama and just enough there to help us understand the story. Saint Serapion on your right was disemboweled. He was strung up and tortured in the 13th century. And Cerberon gives us the moment before this happens. And he doesn't clutter or busy the scene with images of the torturers. We get to imagine them. All we see is the saint awaiting his martyrdom. Right? And the white cloth that takes up 2/3 of the composition is a harbinger of things to come. If you know he was disemboweled, then you realize that just shows us what's about to happen. Right? The horrors yet to come. But still, put up close, very dramatic, very Caravaggio-like. On the left in the National Gallery by the same artist is St. Lucy. Now you'll notice here the colors are brighter. There's a brighter range of colors, but the lighting, the proximity, the dark background, right, that theatricality is still very much influenced by Caravaggio. St. Lucy was martyred, and that's why she carries a palm branch in her hand. That's the standard symbol for martyrdom, right, is the palm branch. That's why on Palm Sunday, if you're Catholic, you carry palm branches as a symbol of Christ's own martyrdom. Right? She wears flowers in her head, in her hair. She was, in fact, I don't remember the exact all of it, but she had her eyes plucked out as part of her mitzvah. It's disgusting, isn't it? Right? Well, more disgusting. There they are. So it looks like oysters, doesn't it? It looks like mussels on the plate. We had mussels this week, but don't they look kind of like you just chuck your mussels out there? Oddly, and this is part of the miracle, is that as soon as the eyes were plucked out, they miraculously reappeared. I guess you can't. So the guy that wanted to sort of martyr her for this ended up having to cut her head off. Right? You never martyr somebody otherwise. You have to cut their head off. So there's her eyes looking out at her, and she's still got her eyes in her head. That's part of the miracle. Right? Don't ask why. Yeah. But what's interesting is St. Lucy The word Lucy comes from the word for light, lucia, right? Comes from the actual word for light, and that has to do with the fact of her eyes, which allow light in, right? We see light. So she's kind of named after her martyrdom, and this is fairly common. St. Agnes, for example, carries around a lamb because Agnes means lamb. So Lucia, with this reference to light, is part of the reason why this legend developed. She was around the same time as Constantine the Great, just before he converted to Christianity, and under his father, who was a terrible persecutor of Christians. And it's interesting that the eye thing didn't come up until later, right? There are other parts of her legend at first, and then they added the whole eye thing, and I think it's because of her name, right? But that's the way she normally appears when we get to the 17th century art, is with her eyes there, and I guess it's easy enough for you to identify because there's her name painted on the surface of the canvas up there as well, right? But again, high drama, right? Especially achieved through the style of the picture, this Caravaggio lighting that Zurbaran learned when he went to Italy. He was in Italy while Caravaggio was alive and brought those practices back to Spain, and we're seeing them here. A lot of Spanish artists are very, very much interested in Caravaggio and his effects. Ribera also spent time in Italy, and he gives us here an image of St. Bartholomew. We saw St. Bartholomew in Michelangelo's Last Judgment, in one of the online art fixes. St. Bartholomew was skinned alive, and here he's strapped up and waiting his martyrdom and looking up toward God. Notice he's looking toward the light, right? And it's very much Caravaggio light coming in on the diagonal from above, but meant to be certainly the light of God, just as it was in the calling of St. Matthew. And that's where St. Bartholomew looks, not at his torturers, but toward God himself. And again, what Ribera has done is to fill the composition with the bared torso of St. Bartholomew as a reminder of what's coming down the pike. What's his fate? To be skinned alive. And that skin that we see will soon be removed from his body. We see the torturer with the knife. Caravaggio in its simplicity. Caravaggio in its dramatic lighting. Caravaggio in its close-up. In this case, Caravaggio in its color scheme. Browns with touches of yellows and reds. Right. So again, Caravaggio worked for Catholic countries as example for sort of how to squeeze sort of the most drama out of a particular scene, how to make it as dramatic as is humanly possible. And usually trying to catch these moments, not necessarily true for St. Lucy, but certainly with St. Bartholomew, these moments of climax, right? The moment in the story where things really happen, right? Not the boring stuff. I remember when I was an undergrad, I kind of responded to Baroque art because it was sort of like the part of they cut out the boring parts of the story. They were always like the really cool parts of the story. The really interesting and exciting parts of the story is what you get to see, or at least maybe the moment leading up to it, right? The other thing I like about a lot of Baroque art, even to this day, is the degree to which all of the composition is about trying to heighten the sense of drama, right? So one of the ways that you can do this as an artist is to rely more on diagonals instead of horizontals and verticals. And you'll notice that Ribera, the body of St. Bartholomew, becomes this strong diagonal that leads all the way across the canvas from the upper right corner to the lower left, and is almost crossed in a way by the diagonal formed by the flow of light. And when we looked at Caravaggio, we saw that same sort of activating diagonals that make your eye move strongly from corner to corner of the canvas. So, Spanish art, very much reflecting the influence of Caravaggio. And again, primarily because they're so Catholic. Right? This is the Spanish Inquisition, right? from the same time period, from the Counter-Reformation. Goes back earlier as well, but it was revived in the late 16th century. We even see Caravaggio style in works of art that aren't religious in Spain. So here's Diego Velázquez, who's to Spanish art may be what Caravaggio is or Bernini is to Italian art of the Baroque. For my money, maybe the best artist that ever lived in Spain. This is a fairly early work from Velázquez. He's about 20 or so when he paints this, 21. Makes me hate him all the more. It's not a religious scene, it's a genre scene. We've talked about genre scenes before. Remember genre scenes, what that term means? Yes, no? Scenes of everyday life, right? We looked at things like the Money Changer and His Wife by Matsais as a genre scene, right? A scene of everyday life. But what we've seen with genre scenes is that often they incorporate allegory and metaphor. And that's the case with this picture as well, right? Now again, Caravaggio elements, I need to point them out. Everything close up, right? We don't even see the whole figure. It's so close. The frame crops off half of the body. That proximity adds to the drama. That's why some of you are sitting in the back of the class, because it's not as intense as if you sit up front, because you're all the way back there, right? It's not even like I'm not in your face. But if I'm up in your face, then it gets a lot more intense, right? Our painters understood this. This is why you watch movies, right? Scenes of intimacy are filmed up close. You get two heads in the frame, and that's it. You know, when people are kissing. If you do it from across the park, then you don't get the same sense of intimacy, right? Filmmakers understand that as well. So that adds to the proximity, adds to the drama, even if it's a non-religious scene. Muted colors, browns with highlights of yellow. I didn't any reds in this one. The darkened background and that spotlight effect coming at an angle from outside the frame. All of these are things that Velázquez inherited from Caravaggio, even though he never met him. He may have never even seen a Caravaggio painting. He's picking it up from people like Rivera and Zurbaran who are bringing it back. Right? He's a second-hand follower of Caravaggio, but a first-rate painter. Now, what about this idea of symbolism? Sorry about the light from the outside coming in, spotlighting that kid. You'll notice if you look at the figure, this is a man who, back in the days before pipes, right, before running water, people would deliver water. So this is a fellow that carries the water from town to town from a source somewhere. So his job is to walk, with a cart full of jugs of water and move from city to city and bring fresh water to the residents of the city for drinking. And so we see the pot in his hand in the foreground that he's brought to town. He's now going to dispense it to the people of the town who have gathered. But of course, Velázquez simplifies this. We only see three people, right? We see the old water carrier. Notice his ruddy flesh. This is the guy who spends his time out in the sun. And Velázquez understands that. Velázquez is able to translate that. He even makes it more apparent by putting the smooth flesh of the little boy right next to him. Right? He's showing us the degree to which he can make paint do different things. Look like the skin, dry, chafing, suntanned or even sunburnt of the older man. Soft, vitamin D deficient for the little boy, right? And there's a third one between them. And you'll notice as you look at the three male figures that each one of them represents a different age, doesn't it? We've got the man on the right who is arguably old age, although honestly he's got all his hair and he's probably younger than I am, but he spends his time in the sun. We've got the little boy, and in between them we have someone who's in between their two ages as well. Someone who looks like late 20s, maybe early 30s. Right? That's probably the allegory. We can go back to the history of art and find a very strong tradition for images showing the three ages of mankind. Youth, maturity, old age. Youth getting ready to live, maturity enjoying life, old age past all that, handing it off to the next generation. And that's exactly what's happening in the picture. The older man is handing the cup to the younger man, and the one between them is drinking. Can you see that? He's got, it's kind of hard in the shadow, and you can tell he's got a talk to his face. He's drinking, right? So this is probably intended as an allegory for the three ages of man. And Velázquez is very good not only about showing the different skin qualities of each of the three ages, but also associating the objects with each of the three ages. So our water cellar has that great pot in the foreground. I just love this detail because not only can you tell it's unglazed pottery, right? It doesn't have a shiny cover on it. It's just stoneware. But you can also see the beads of water where he's dripped on it. And you can even see, if you look here, I'm going to bring the pen up, right? If you look at this area right here, you can see where the water's actually hit it and smoothed it out a bit. Right? The 20-year-old painter, darn it, right? And in many ways, I think he's kind of showing off, like just what a good painter is, and he's good. I mean, he's really good, right? So we can see the water beating up. And the surface of that pot is meant as an analogy for the surface of the water cellar. Both are dry. Both are, what do we want to say? Scaly to the touch, right? And he has his hand directly on it. As we move across, we see two different kinds of pottery. You see glazed pottery down below and a porcelain jug. The difference between pottery and porcelain is porcelain has glass mixed into the clay. So it's much more refined, and we can see the difference in the surface of all three. And we're moving our way back towards the youth who has smoother skin still. So we can see these still life elements within the picture as underscoring the overall theme of the picture. And again, just to show off how good he is, the boy has got that glass, and you can see the water's so cool that the glass is frosted on the outside. Velázquez is a fantastic painter. He really understands paint. And we'll see a bit more of this in one of the, there's an art fix coming up for Velázquez this weekend that covers some of his work in detail. I mean, he's a knockout painter, right? So again, a genre scene with moralizing overtones or symbolic overtones. That there's more there than just meets the eye. And that is always the case when we see scenes of everyday life. They're not just snapshots, if you will, snippets of the world around them painted because they could. But rather they are using these things around them to reveal other ideas. Hoping that maybe you one day will look at the world around you and see things more than what meets the eye. Now, this painting was done in Seville, where Velázquez lived. He gave it to a diplomat in Seville, one of his friends from this small town, who took it to Madrid with him and showed the picture to the King of Spain, King Philip IV. And Philip IV, after seeing this painting, said, "Please go back to Seville and bring Velázquez to me. I want him to make paintings for me." And from 1620 on, Velázquez became the primary portrait painter to King Philip IV of Spain. Here is one of his early portraits of Philip, a life-size standing portrait where Philip is holding a letter in his hand, a letter that you've written him, the viewer, that asks for audience with the king. And he's now given you that audience. He's waiting for you to come and visit him. He's a member of the Habsburg family, which we'll talk a little bit more about, but they are in power in Spain and elsewhere in Europe all the way to World War I. It's pretty much the downfall of the Habsburg Empire. But we're here at the earliest years of it, not the earliest, the first 2 centuries of the Habsburg dynasty. King Philip IV of Spain. Now, gave almost every portrait commission from court to Velázquez. And he saw something in this genre scene that made him think that this is the man I want for the job. You might notice that he's not the handsomest fellow in the world. The Habsburg has a tendency to have a very, very thick jaw, puffy lips, a bulbous nose, what my wife might call a horsey face, you know? And you might ask, well, why didn't Velázquez, make him look a little bit better? There are photographs after all. Why didn't he clean him up a bit? And the bottom line is that he did. We've looked at this with x-rays, and that's what he looked like, right, when he started. And you can see that he looks a whole lot better, doesn't he? I want Velázquez painting my portrait, right, to get rid of his double chin, Maybe give me some hair, right? He's cleaned him up quite a bit in the process of painting him. And this is probably why Philip IV liked Velázquez so much, was his ability to sharpen the details, right? To flatter the people. And after all, isn't that what a portrait's all about? You don't hire a portrait painter to make you look ugly. You hire a portrait painter to make you look fantastic, right? And that's exactly what Velázquez was able to do for Philip IV of Spain. His most famous picture, and the one that we discuss online, is Las Meninas, which means the ladies in waiting in Spanish. It's the daughter of Philip IV. Philip IV, he was so ugly because his family was inbreeding to keep power. Right? They were marrying first cousins right, left, and center in order to consolidate power. And most of Philip IV's kids came out either just butt ugly or died in infancy because of birth defects, because of marrying so close to the same bloodline. Infanta Margarita, in the middle, was one of the few that was born healthy. There were more than just her, but one of the few. And B, stunningly beautiful, which was very, very rare for a Habsburg. And he was his favorite daughter. So he hires Velázquez to make a painting of her that's going to hang in his office, right, at his desk. So he looks up, he sees her, his favorite daughter. And it's huge, right? Velázquez stands life-size. The picture that we're looking at is the size of the picture that he's painting, right? He would need a ladder to paint the top of it, right? That is the size of this. Which suggests that maybe we see him in the act of painting the picture we're looking at, which is kind of fascinating, right? And whenever Philip looked up, he not only would see his daughter with her retinue, there's her teachers on the right, the two ladies in waiting flanking on either side, a dwarf, courts kept dwarves as entertainment. On the far right was a little child. Your text says he's kicking that dog, but he's not. Anybody that owns a dog knows what he's doing. He's like going skitchy, skitchy, skitchy on the dog's butt. The dog is the happiest dog in painting. He's just like, he's like St. Teresa in ecstasy. He's got his eyes are half closed. He's a catty purring. The kid is not kicking him, no matter what anybody might tell you. That is a very, very happy hound, right? And Velázquez on the left, that's a self-portrait of Velázquez in the act of painting. And you'll notice in the background we have pictures on the wall, but there's a mirror as well. And there in the mirror is Philip. Painted, interestingly, fuzzy, so that we focus on the figures in the foreground. Right? Still some Caravaggio lighting going on here. We see it coming in from outside. It's all very mysterious, right? We'll talk more about it online. Yeah. But this is part of Philip's commissions from Velázquez is to be an official portrait painter for the court. And in this case, it's ostensibly a portrait of Philip's favorite daughter, but there's so much more to it than that. Right? Victoria. The people in the middle, one of them is him, Philip, right? The other one is Philip's wife. And this is part of the mystery, right? Because okay. There's a physical property of mirrors that I didn't know until a few years back. So I'm going to tell you this if you didn't know. And this is true. You can go
a mirror, it is half the size of the thing that's reflected. Period. It's half the size of the thing. It doesn't matter how far you are from it, half the size of the thing. John Gallagher is one of the great mysteries of physics. Okay? Any reflection in any mirror, a flat mirror, not a conic mirror, flat mirror, any reflection in any mirror is half the size of the thing that's reflected. You still do it. Get a magic mark, get a chart, and a mirror, and have somebody stand and trace it, and then measure, and you'll see exactly half the size. That means if they are in the mirror, double their size, they should be somewhere in here. But they're not, right? So what does the mirror reflect? This Velasquez understand that in the first place. Does it reflect Philip and his wife out here kind of coming in, and this is why everybody stops and turns? Right? They're looking at Philip and his wife, and mom and dad that come into the room. The guy in the back at the door is a guard, a court guard, right? They're protected. We sort of come to them, everybody's looking at you, right? Nobody in the picture is looking at anybody else in the picture. The focus of the picture is out here, and it's all on you. And so they've all turned to look at us, including the last kids, right? And are we them? Well, we know that Philip paid for it, so certainly that's one way to look at it. But the other weird thing is that, see that curtain that's been pulled back over their head on the right, with that red curtain in the mirror? Okay? Just here. Online will be great detail. I found a 30,000 pixel image of this. I know, it took forever to download. And thank you, Photoshop, right? So I got really, really good details. But they're the online thing. Rather than the PowerPoint, right? So there's a curtain over his head, and that pulled back curtain that you see is something we see in portraits all the time. Right? Of a pulled back curtain. It's sort of this artifice of portraiture. And so that's what some people would think that maybe it's a slightly cockeyed reflection that is reflecting the painting he's making. Instead. Possibly. Right? And Velasquez loves giving us screwy mirrors. Mirrors that don't do what they should. And I think he also knew the Arlecchini picture from Jan van Eyck, where there was a mirror with two people in it, right? And where the reflection isn't quite right. So it raises all sorts of really fascinating questions, right? Because it really is about, if you look at the picture too, right, on that level, all this stuff about it out here is focusing on you and me. But this is Velasquez's studio at court. Okay, so when he became court painter, he got one of the rooms in the palace to be the place for kind of studio. Okay? And Philip and his family had been collecting pictures for about 100 years, and we can identify the painting on the wall. That Velasquez probably got to choose to go there. Right? They have all paintings about making art. Right? About mythologies where artists, by making art, try to challenge the gods of ancient Greece. Say, I can make it better. So they're all about sort of artistic practice, being something of great status, that's something that makes the artist better. And that relates to what we see Velasquez doing, right? He's in the middle of the painting. Again, it's also weird because you think almost, Velasquez, he's looking at you and he's painting, right? He's got his brush, and he's got his easel. And he's working on that his palette, and he's working on that massive picture. And has he stopped? Did he paint Philip and the wife? Maybe with the curtain pulled back and posed there? Is he painting them when they've been distracted? We don't get to see the canvas, right? I love this picture. I've never seen it. It's in Madrid, in Spain, right? But it's huge, right? He's 155 size. And then there's all those things about light moving through, right? All of these different surfaces. So he's again pulling out the stops of what I can make this look like a mirror, as opposed to the works that don't have reflection, right? And you see light coming in from the back, side, you have shutters just almost out of frame here on the side. The idea of being able to allow the light in as he wants to control it. And then he controls the brush work so that the things that he wants you to focus on are sharply painted. Now, if you're doing the Velasquez downtown, right? Who's doing the Alaska's downtown? Somebody points out. I would be there. We have Alaska's painting here. We have one. We'll see it next, right? But one of the things you can do is he uses the brushwork to focus your attention. So the things he wants you to look at are really sharply focused. And the things he doesn't want to look at are out of focus, right? So these figures are the most sharply focused. And you probably saw in this picture that she's less focused. And back there, look at him. So schmutzy in the back. He's been rubbed out, of course, right? But he hasn't. He just doesn't want. They're an important part of the entourage, but they're not as important as she is, as he is, as they are, right? He's really good about using paint application to assist you as a viewer, right? Make you look at the things he wants you to look at. In addition to his other ways in which he lays down paint, in ways that we've seen can create texture, right, where the paint looks like the texture of the object. So, great details online this weekend. And I'll email you when I get that up, right? Because if I pull this down, I'm going to ruin everything and stop, right? One other Velazquez that we'll look at before we move on is this one, downtown. Now, this one, I think you can see more clearly here what I was just talking about, how he manipulates the paint application so that the things he wants you to look at are more sharply focused. And by the way, they don't have lenses, they don't have cameras. So when we talk about sharply focused, we can think about, our DSLRs or whatnot, and like focusing on things and having depth of field and all of that, but he doesn't know any of that. So her face, right, her shoulders, this part is sharply focused. Her hands, which are moving, are left blurry, right? And very, very slightly painted. Now, in this case, somebody's got the hiccups. No, can't help it. Spoonful of sugar. In this case, the painting's unfinished. He was going to build up the background, and you can probably see in the foreground there's parts that are just sort of sketched in, right? This tabletop or whatever this is that she's working on here, right? That's only barely sketched in, and initially originally would have finished it, but for some reason he never did, and it was still in his possession when he died in the late 1650s. Here's a nice close-up of her hands. You can see they're just, look at my fingers, just one stroke of paint. He hasn't really built it up yet. But I don't think he's ever going to build it up a lot further than that. In that, he wants you to be looking at her face. And he uses the paint application to catch the action of her hands. The fact that she's involved with, right, stitching lace. And the theme of the lace is picked up by the other elements of the picture. We have lace on the table, but we also have that lace shawl over her shoulders. Right? So it's again, it's a genre scene, isn't it? It's a scene of everyday life, where we see this woman just enwrapped in this activity of sewing, of sewing lace in particular, right? The lace that she's already wearing. And again, as Velazquez, this fantastic painter, he's using the paint application in order to focus your attention on certain parts. Now, genre scenes, as I said before, genre scenes have allegory, right? They come front-loaded with symbolism. There's a reason to look at what's going on around you, to find perhaps moral lessons in what we see, buried meanings in the world around us. For women making lace, this is a Dutch painting from roughly the same time period. Usually these scenes of women sewing are meant to be scenes of domestic virtue. Being a hard worker at home, very sexist, isn't it? Stay home and do the sewing, right? While we go out and drink ale at the tavern. Yeah. That's kind of the message here, that this is a paragon of domestic virtue, right? And we see pictures everywhere where women sewing are seen as women dedicated to a job that needs to be done.
a job that has to do with making a good home. Another Dutch picture by a woman artist, Judith Leister, shows a woman working by candlelight on her lace. Again, that same theme, right? The virtue of hard work, the virtue of domestic work. And that's driven home in this picture by the randy devil that's coming in and trying to stop her from doing that and get her to put down her needle and, come along with me. But no, she's virtuous. She's sticking to the job at hand. These are the sorts of things I think that are there for Velázquez as well. This is an image about the virtuousness of hard work. That said, in many languages, the verb for sewing is a synonym for sex. And you can see why, right? In and out, and piercing and so forth. Is our needlewoman layered with a different meaning? She leans forward, her cleavage rather apparent in her dress. Is it perhaps something more to this image as well, to where the act of sewing is seen as a visual pun of sorts for the sexual allure of the woman who sews? That's again an overlay of this Judith Leister picture as well. He's attracted by her sewing. Right. To this day in Holland, we use the word screw, right? They use the word sew. That's the same analogy, right? Okay. Enough of that naughtiness. Spain in the 17th century, the time that Velázquez is working for King Philip IV, the Spanish Empire included more than just Spain. The Spanish Empire also included the region we've been talking about before, the region of Flanders, which became known in the 16th and 17th century as the Spanish Netherlands. It's what is today Belgium. Right? And that means that this region was equally Catholic. The Spanish Netherlands, Flanders. This is the region we talked about before. This is where Jan van Eyck lived. This is where Roger van der Weyden lived. A century later, it's where Quentin Matsys lived. It's where Peter Bruegel lived. Right? All from this same region of the Spanish Netherlands or Belgium, known as Flanders before that. Right? That was part of the Spanish Empire. Now, during this period, during the Baroque period, this region is at war. The Spanish are at war. They are at war with the Dutch. Holland, modern-day Holland, then known as the United Provinces, or the Netherlands, right, the United Province of the Netherlands, they were Protestant. And beginning in 1568, they rebelled against the Spanish leaders of the region. They didn't like being governed by someone who lived all the way down there. They wanted self-governance. And on religious lines, Holland splits away from the Spanish Netherlands. And as you can see, the front between the two regions is right above Antwerp. Right, and I'll indicate that on the map. Right? So, the United Provinces of the Netherlands, what we call Holland for short, was Protestant, split away beginning in 1568 from the Spanish Netherlands, also known as Flanders. And that split was inspired by the Reformation. The Dutch went Protestant. This was no easy task. It was a war that lasted literally 80 years. The 80 Years' War. It was begun in 1568. It wasn't finished until a peace was declared in 1648. So throughout the entire Baroque period, Spain is at war with Holland. And that war is primarily being fought in the Spanish Netherlands. This is an important element of history, period, in that this war drains the resources of the Habsburg family. They start off the 17th century being one of the richest empires in all of Europe. By the middle of the century, they got nothing. The war killed them. Oddly enough, it seems to have helped the Dutch. They controlled the seas. This is the era of the Dutch East India Corporation, exploring Hudson's Bay. Right. So it's important to remember that in the background of this, we're talking about a period of war. And our next section to look at, our next region to look at, is the Spanish Netherlands. And I'll just set this up, and we'll have to do this online next week because we're running out of time today. Right. Peter Paul Rubens lived in the city of Antwerp. It's right on the front line between the Spanish Netherlands and the United Provinces, between Flanders and Holland. Right. And what do we want to say about this to begin with? As dramatic can get. Again, they're Catholic. So those rules that were set down by the Counter-Reformation are going to be important to them. Rubens had gone to Italy. He was there when Caravaggio was painting. There's some bright spotlighting, but it's not really Caravaggio-like. We can see far too deep into the shadows. Right? There's no curtain behind them of darkness, you know. But at the same time, the strong diagonal formed by that cross from the lower right corner to the upper left. This is not the moment of the crucifixion. This is the moment when the Roman henchmen, if you will, the Roman soldiers are raising Christ's cross, about to plunk it into its pothole, where he will eventually suffer and die. Christ, in the middle of all this, is turning his eyes towards heaven. Isn't really suffering. In fact, I always talk about it as being kind of a touchdown Jesus. You know, he's triumphant, isn't he? His arms are well above his head, but at the same time, there's a sense of triumph, right? He's like Rocky at the top of the steps of the Philadelphia Museum in the first Rocky movie. You can almost hear the music, because this gives us an idea that even though Christ is about to suffer and die in his body, he will be triumphant eventually, right? As he looks forward. Again, no shying away from the gory bits, because it's trying to inspire in you, the viewer, this sense of emotionalism that should lead you to a sense of piety. This is the suffering that he underwent for you, right? Christ's name up there in multiple languages. We know that Rubens spoke about 5 different languages. There's a famous story of somebody coming to his studio and finding him writing poetry in one language, painting at the same time, having somebody read him letters in a 3rd language, and listening to music in a 4th language all at the same time. He's a man of incredible talents. What gives us this about the hunkiest Jesus we've seen as well. Like really buff. And being now raised up into the upright position. This is the moment when Christ is carrying all of the sins of the world. And I think Rubens, with these absolutely massive muscular figures, when he'd gone to Italy, he'd obviously been looking at Michelangelo. Right? Even though Michelangelo was 100 years earlier. But these figures give you the sense that this is no easy task, raising that cross. And he makes them about as burly as they could possibly be, about as muscular as they could possibly be. And that's got a theological reason. Christ is bearing all of mankind's sins on his shoulders, theologically speaking. So raising the cross should be no easy activity. And I love it's almost easy to miss him, that centurion underneath the cross that's pushing back to help them raise the cross up. Right? Again, the power of the scene is also signaled by the size of this picture. Look at that. Just to give you a sense of scale, right? I took some Marymount students to Antwerp a few years back. This is like 2010 or 2012. And so those are all Marymount grads, lower right corner. But you get a sense from Shelley standing there, just the scale that we're talking about here. This is again to give you the sense of the enormity of the task. Right? Well, that's 6:15, so we'll stop there. So for next week, remember we don't have class here. We'll pick up this stuff. Finish up Rubens, look at other works of the Baroque period in
many of my questions go online, right? And that should get us on schedule pretty well for the rest of the semester. So I won't see you until a week from Monday, right? But there still are some things coming due insofar as the worksheets are concerned, right? And as we work our way through the rest of the material, more of those will pop up, and I'll let you know when they do. Okay? Have a good week and wait for me and get work done on your other stuff.